start. All right, hi everybody. Thanks a lot for coming. We're going to talk about open textbooks here today. Before I get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of background in my recent job change. So many of you know me from my work with the Student Public Interest Research Groups, directing the Textbook Affordable campaign. I worked with that organization for 7 years, engaging students on campuses across the country to advocate for affordable textbooks, including open educational resources. And as of the summer, I transitioned to Spark. And so many of you may know me, probably don't know Spark. So Spark is an advocacy organization that works on promoting a more open system for scholarly communication. It's actually best known for its work on open access to scholarly research. But recently, there's been a lot of momentum and a lot of developments in that area, and the organization is expanding its open educational resources and brought me on board to develop a new program, and I couldn't be more thrilled and excited to be working with them. But I also wanted to point out that in the back of the room, Ethan Senak is taking over PIRGs' work on textbooks. So he's a great ally. We've already been tag teaming a lot of work in Washington, D.C., so I encourage you to check in with Ethan as well if you're interested in open affordable textbooks. So the goal of this session is to just provide an overview about what's going on with open textbooks. I see people in the room who've been working on open textbooks for years, and I see other people who may not be as familiar with the background. So I'm hoping that it'll be a useful session regardless. It's always useful to hear an overview of what's going on, how to make arguments, what are the most compelling facts. And then at the end, we'll talk about the stuff that is going on campuses right now that I'm most excited about and see the most potential in. And hopefully have time for a little bit of discussion at the end to talk about what you're most interested in. So taking a step back, the context we're working in is in the United States and in many other countries around the world, the cost of higher education is skyrocketing. And in the US in particular, student loans and student debt has become a significant problem. Last year, we've heard the statistic a lot. Student loan debt collectively in the US topped $1 trillion. Default rates are on the rise, so students aren't able to make the payments. They graduate with an average of $27,000 in debt, and more aren't able to keep up with the payments. And it's getting a lot of high-profile attention. This is an op-ed by Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel laureate in economics, saying how student debt is really undermining the American dream. So, if we're going to improve our economy and make sure that we have an active and educated citizenry, we need to address the issue of college costs. And textbook costs are part of that equation. So a lot of different factors go into the cost of education. The cost of instructional materials is particularly significant for students because it's one of the last they have to pay. A lot of times it comes out of pocket. They've run out of financial aid or loan checks, paying for tuition, room and board, and things like that, and textbooks come at the end. So it's very burdensome on students, and we'll talk about the impacts that's having on students in a second, but I want to run over just quickly what the market is looking like right now. So in the US, the average student budget for books and course supplies is $1,207. This is a College Board number that was recently updated just a few weeks ago from $1,200 even last year. And for some students, this is the difference between going to school and dropping out because of cost. Community colleges, at some community colleges, this amount of money is paying tuition. So it's a very burdensome expense. The GAO, US GAO, which is the investigative arm of Congress, recently released a report that found that textbook prices over the last 11 years have gone up 82%. So that's getting close to doubling. So these are, in the lifespan of, 2 or 3 classes of students going through higher education, we are already getting toward textbook prices doubling. And that's about 3 times the rate of inflation of other prices. And just to put that in context with some of the other costs out there, tuition and fees have risen a little bit faster over this particular time period. But you can see that both are far and away outstripping inflation. And the textbook industry continues strong. So it's currently estimated around, this is a year or two old, an $8.8 billion industry in the US in higher education. It gets up closer to $12 to $14 billion if you include K-12. So textbook publishing is big business and is continuing to perpetuate this problem within higher education. And one of the reasons this is allowed to happen is that there's a kind of a weird dynamic in the textbook market that allows prices to rise really rapidly. And we refer to it as a broken market. So in this case, it's a three-way street instead of a two-way street. We have the professor is the person who chooses on behalf of the student what book they'll use in their course, which means that the student is really left without any options. And the publisher who sets the price of the textbook is able to demand really high prices and continue increasing those prices because students don't have any option but to pay. And of course, the system is the way that higher education works in America. Professors have academic freedom, and that's a good thing. We want professors to be able to choose the materials most appropriate for their courses. But it's gotten to the point where they can no longer do that in a way that's affordable for their students. So let's talk about what we're seeing in the field right now and what students are experiencing on campuses across the country. So this is a pretty typical experience for a college student. This is calculus. One of the most widely used calculus textbooks in the US by John Stewart. You may have read articles about him. He has a giant mansion in Canada that is a work of art. It's amazing, but calculus textbooks bought it. You can see the price tag here is $255. That's actually gone up. This is calculus. This is a subject that has not dramatically changed in the last 200 years. And yes, pedagogy has changed. But this textbook is in its 7th edition. And this is what students experience when they go to the bookstore. These are the price tags that they see. You'd think that digital textbooks would be better, but unfortunately the prices are so high that even the digital alternatives that publishers are offering end up being outrageously expensive. Here's a Principles of Economics textbook, $144 for an ebook that lasts 180 days. So you pay that much and you don't even get to keep it. I mean, I guess the deal, if you consider that the paper book costs $289. That's a lesson in economics. Another trend that we're observing is that a lot of times textbooks come bundled with, at first it was like workbooks and CDs that increase the value of the textbook, but really were just add-ons that helped inflate the price. But now what we're seeing is a lot of digital supplements like passcodes. So we said before the ebook expires after 180 days. Well, that's really good for publishers because they don't have to deal with the used book market for those ebooks. But what do you do about print books? Because print books can be resold. Well, if you attach a passcode to that book that expires after 180 days, and shrink wrap it in a way that students can only get the passcode if they buy the printed textbook that's shrink wrapped with the passcode. You can eliminate the used book market and make more money, and that's exactly what's happening here. I think 3 out of these 7 supplements that come in this package are digital and expire. So students are finding a lot of ways around this. So the conventional cost-saving measures that we hear about a lot, using e-readers can save, maybe 40% off the cost of a print textbook if you amortize the cost of an e-reader. E-books are around 50-50. Renting is pretty good. You can save about 60% on that if you can find a way to rent a textbook because they're not always available. Used books, 25% savings is pretty conservative. A lot of times students can save even more by selling the books back. So, there are ways for students to save money. But as prices continue to rise, these measures become less and less effective. And we're starting to see new trends. So we're at a point where we're now seeing 1 in 3 students reporting that they've downloaded course material from an unauthorized website. So students are seeking other ways to get access to this material that maybe isn't quite as legal as it should be. And that's actually up from 1 to 5 since 2010, so in the last 3 years. That practice has increased a lot, just like textbook prices have. 2 in 5 students have reported that they share books with classmates to reduce costs. So what that means is that not every student in the class actually has full access to a textbook. So studying isn't effective when students don't have access. And 7 in 10 undergraduates report actually skipping 1 or more of their textbooks in their academic career because the cost is too high. So students are foregoing the purchase of textbooks because the cost is so high. And 1 in 4 students say they frequently or occasionally don't register for a course because the textbook is too high. So students aren't pursuing academic pathways because of textbook costs. And that's messed up. This is a problem. And we have a solution, which is open educational resources. So I'm actually not going to talk too much about what open textbooks are, because I think at this point in the conference we all kind of understand it. So the main points when we talk about open textbooks with other people are first that they're free online and accessible to all students starting day 1 of the course. So there are no students who don't buy the textbook because it's too expensive or delay the purchase or share copies. Every student has access. Second, they're available in many different flexible formats, including print, which is very important because many students still prefer to use a printed textbook. And also in many other formats that don't expire, so students can download and keep them on whatever device they want to use. And they're openly licensed, which creates great opportunities for instructors to actually adapt the material and make it more appropriate for their students. And the 2 facts that I think are most compelling in supporting and making the case for open textbooks are first, that the savings come out to about 80% over the use of traditional textbooks, or about $100 per student per course. And tomorrow morning, there will be a keynote address that's very exciting, where we'll dig in a little bit more into the actual potential savings market-wide that have occurred so far with open textbooks, and where things could potentially go in the future. So stay tuned for that. The second fact is that there have been a number of academic studies that have shown that the use of textbooks in place of traditional textbooks is correlated with higher grades and better outcomes. So students are doing better in these classes and are actually completing the classes rather than dropping out and having to retake them. And I see the author of some of those studies in the room, so maybe if there are questions about those, we can talk about it later. So I want to spend the rest of the time talking about what's actually going on in the field. And there's so much going on. There's no way for me to cover everything in the 10, 13 minutes I have left. So I'm just going to talk about the stuff that I think is most exciting, and we can talk more and discussion questions and answer if you want to know about other stuff. So just a quick overview. What needs to happen to get open textbooks used in courses? So we have open textbooks, they're being developed. We have a number of professors across the country using them, but what do we do to increase that? So I think the first thing is that we need more turnkey, high-quality open textbooks that match what professors use today. So there's the early adopters who want to experiment and want to use more adaptable, remixable OER, but most professors just want to use a textbook and want to do the right thing and want to use affordable textbooks. And if we can give them open options, that will be successful. We also need to provide more support for adoption, so professional development, helping faculty get what they need in order to transition to open textbooks. And finally, it's just more awareness. Most people don't know what open textbooks are. They may have heard of it, but they don't actually understand the concept, especially with all of the confusion around MOOCs and online education and everything like that. So we need to do a lot of work there. And I want to talk about 2 ways to accomplish this. First, policy, and second, campus advocacy. So in policy, I'm actually going to be doing a session right after that. That's going to dig in after this in, I don't remember which room, that's going to dig in a little bit deeper into OER policy. But really they fall into 3 categories: providing resources to fund OER development, open licensing requirements that repurpose existing systems to produce OER, and just inducements and calls for action on OER. A few examples for each of those categories. So many of you have heard British Columbia invested money to develop open textbooks for some of their largest enrollment courses. This followed after programs in Washington State and California to do those things. Very exciting project. I think I saw Mary in the room. No? Okay. There's, for the open licensing policies, the most exciting one that happened recently was in the California community colleges. Their chancellor's office added a new policy that all grants and contracts through the chancellor's office that developed open education or developed educational materials would have an open license on them as part of signing on to that contract or accepting that grant. So we're not telling anybody they have to do it if they don't want to, but if they accept money or sign a contract, that's part of it. And then for inducements and just endorsement of OER, I want to go back a few years to the Foothill DMs, a community college district policy, which essentially says two things. So one is that faculty, we support the use of open textbooks and encourage you to do that. And the second piece is that it requires the chancellor of this community college district to report annually on what they are doing with open textbooks. So this is a very simple policy and something that is relatively easy to pass compared to trying to get resources or pass a licensing policy. This is just we support the idea and we want you to tell us what you're doing. And incidentally, Foothill DMs has become one of the national leaders on open textbooks. And I think that this idea of reporting and just requiring and asking institutional leadership to talk about what they're doing with open educational resources could be really successful. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about going forward on policy in the coming years. So moving on to campus advocacy, there are a few groups that are really key in this. So students are the first one. The student voice for open textbooks is just essential because they're the ones that are affected by this. And a lot of times the student voice does get left out of the conversation because we think we know better than students. But it's really important to engage students, and they can be a very powerful engine for advocacy. Libraries are relatively new to the open educational resources movement. Just in the past couple of years, a number of libraries have started really exciting programs on both the creation and adoption fronts. And Spark, as a library membership organization, is going to be working in that area to advance that. And then finally, institutions, just leveraging OER to increase outcomes and their competitiveness and just institutional awareness and prestige. So a couple of examples there. So I want to go back to the Student Public Interest Research Group, Student PIRGs, where I used to work, done amazing things to engage students as advocates for OER. We've organized students to reach out to faculty across the country and educate them about open textbooks, what's available in their subjects, and why it's important to go and seek out these options for their students. Student PIRGs have done a lot of work on awareness as well. So these are just some pictures from the events that we've held. So the one on the far right is a photo petition event that we did, getting students to call on Congress to reduce the cost of textbooks and bill on how much they spend. The middle one is from the Textbook Rebellion National Tour. We went on a 40-campus, 6-week van tour that toured the entire country. We drove 9,000 miles, if you can believe it, with 2 giant mascot costumes. One of them is pictured there. And by the end of it, people were like recognizing it when we walked on campus. And it generated over 100 media hits that presented open textbooks as a solution. And the final one is a textbook graveyard where they're kind of talking about used books and the used book market and how a lot of times textbooks end up dying when students aren't able to sell them back because a new edition came out. So moving on to libraries, I want to showcase, there are a number of libraries that have done programs like this, but just showcasing this one in particular at UMass. They launched an initiative that would help faculty transition from expensive textbooks to alternative and open textbooks. And the way it worked is that they provided small stipends to faculty, $1,000 each, to support their time to do this, and then provided librarian support. And librarians are experts in curating and identifying materials, and help these faculty identify other curricular resources. And this project to date has saved students an estimated $750,000. So that's $250,000. And it's just in its second year. Another project to showcase is the Oregon State University Libraries. They recently issued a request for proposals and are going to be developing an open textbook published through their university press. A very exciting idea, and hopefully something that we can help foster in other places. And then as far as institutions taking the lead on this, the University of Minnesota, we have Christy in the room, Christy Jensen from the University of Minnesota Open Textbook Catalog, which has gone out and curated a list of the top open textbooks available, and is working to get reviews of those textbooks written by faculty, and then have a searchable catalog with information about the books that faculty use. And then another project I want to showcase is the Tidewater Community College Textbook Free Degree. So this is a super cool project. Basically, they've taken an entire degree program and found one section of each course to switch to an open textbook and develop textbooks for those courses. So a student could essentially go through an entire degree program without having to buy a traditional textbook. And this is, just a great example of institutional leadership, and I think Tidewater Community College saw it as an opportunity to get its name out there and be competitive in its region. And I hope it works because it's an awesome idea. So I just want to close with one thought here. All of the great work that is happening out there right now, there's a ton of momentum, and I truly believe that open textbooks can happen. But we need to make it happen. It's not going to happen in months. So I hope all of you walk out of this room today thinking, what can I do when I get back to campus about open textbooks? And I encourage you to contact me, check out Spark's website, check out the Student PIRGs. I'm happy to discuss ideas anytime. So just let me know. And I think we have a couple of minutes left for discussion. I'm happy to take questions. David?
Hi, Nicole. Great presentation as always. A couple questions for you. Do you think we need to take a really critical look, because time and resources are scarce, as to what is effective at driving adoption? So if we contrast the BCC efforts or the UMass efforts where it was done by the community, by the schools, to drive OER, versus more legislative efforts like in California, which frankly I don't think have been that successful. Do you think we should start to say, okay, we should put more energies into one area versus another?
Absolutely. I think assessing the work that has already been done and figuring out what is most successful is incredibly important, and it's something that we as a community need to be working on. And I think we've had a number of conversations between all of the open textbook projects out there. We had one in British Columbia in April and had an unconference last night to talk about it. So I think that's a good foundation for that. My recommendation would be to continue doing that every year and make it more formal and really dig in on adoption. Creation is important, but we need adoption to actually save students money. Other questions? Anybody want to talk about a project that I didn't talk about?
Just generally, are you focusing anywhere in the international arena with open textbooks?
So the work that I have done in the past on open textbooks has been focused in the U.S., but there are a lot of opportunities internationally on open textbooks, particularly in K-12 education. So what we're finding in terms of student organizing on this issue internationally, there's a lot of interest in the translation aspect of open licensing, because publishers a lot of times don't produce textbooks in small languages and small populations, because it's just not worth it to them. But an open license book can be translated legally. There's also the point about cultural relevancy. A lot of places use textbooks that were built for the US or UK, and there are examples like Grand Central Station, which every American knows what that is, but somebody in Norway probably doesn't.
Is there a discussion about not just open textbooks, but like open content services? Because so much of what Pearson and McGraw-Hill do now has less and less to do with the actual textbook and more to do with all those wraparound services, the adaptive learning stuff and all that. And it's kind of their way of kind of staying ahead of, I think, the open movement, right? And
Yeah,
so how does the open movement compete with that in terms of adoption?
Well, it needs to.
Right.
So I mentioned before, I used the word turnkey. And that would be included in that term. We need to develop open textbooks that are fully supported with the learning tools that faculty need to be most effective. And I think that it's an excellent point that that is what the publishers are doing. And I think what we as a community need to do is focus in on developing content that can be used.
Are there, just a quick follow-up, are there examples now of open, like an open version of Newton or an open version of McGraw-Hill's Learn Smart?
I'm going to punt to David.
Yeah, so at OpenStack, what we're building is an ecosystem where we have partners that provide these full service solutions. So we partner with WebAssign, Sapling Learning, we'll be partnering with others too. So faculty have access to equivalent or better resources. Now it's not always free, but the fact that you're able to merge open resources with these services, you can greatly reduce the cost of the student.
We're out of time. Hopefully you're all